Aloha. This video I wanted to break down specifically what my focus is in reference to the threat that is the New Age community and flat Earth with its New Age tendencies under the guise of flat Earth possibly unifying and bringing everybody together and so on and so forth. Understanding that the New World Order or the New Age Order is using this very sentiment to bring this no borders sort of everybody is all one under love and light perspective into the forefront of the idea of forward progress. By not understanding our past, we won't understand what's happening right now and what's being generated for us to fall further into an enslavement trap of the future. You can't understand what is going on right now if you don't understand what has happened before you to your ancestors, and you won't be able to understand where it is that you are going at the same time if you don't know where you are right now and what has happened before us. When the Western world kicked into gear and went live pretty much with the colonization of lands across the earth today, when you see all of these American and British military bases across, or so-called the United States of American military bases across the earth, this is no different than so-called settlers and colonizers of back in the day going and dropping their bags and, saying this is our land and planting vineyards and creating this whole idea of Western civilization, which inherently looks down upon the people that surrounded them, that they were labeled as primitive and savage. And when you are labeled a certain way, you will have certain people within the labeled community who will say, yeah, we are primitive and savage, and then they will buy into the illusion that the individuals have locked them into in the first place. This is the mentality of peer pressure. This is the intention of the mainstream media. It's the intention of the university system. It's the intention of NASA and the heliocentric model when they say, oh, you're one of those flat earthers. You believe in the flat earth. You're crazy. Something's wrong with you. You're de-evolving. Haven't we gone past that? We still have people who believe in the flat earth. Come on. What's wrong? Don't you know basic science? Don't you know this? Don't you know that? It's all based upon the same idea that I explained just now, which was, something's wrong with you. You're primitive and savage if you think this way. And because you don't think like us, you need to be either removed from society or thrown in a hospital or thrown in jail because you don't fall under the authoritative slave mind that believes the synthetic hive mind that's been promoted by the so-called powers that be, not only of today, but that predate today, that led up to the deception of heliocentrism. See, back in the day, the so-called powers that be could control people with the idea of taxes, and which is still happening today, but taxes, the original taxes of like the sheriff of Nottingham knocking on the doors and just taking the little bits of crumbs of money that people had just to provide food and pay it to the King of England, just using as an example of control and authority. The King of England, who was empowered by their ideas of God at that time frame, same thing as today, the bloodlines of God and all this other stuff. And then to kick everything into gear, it was locked into your reality by the religions that are sponsored by the government, just like the government sponsored by the religions, who have demonized other types of religion the same way they demonize people by saying, oh, well, you must be devil worshippers if you're into this Gnostic thought or whatever kind of, if you don't think like the mainstream religions, if you don't follow the religions of the state, the government, the crown, you are primitive and savage. You are not part of the new world. Something is wrong with you. And back in the day, they were actually hanging people that were labeled as witches and so on and so forth. And this was this whole Christian crusade and Catholic crusade that is very crucial to enslaving an entire people, because you have to enslave not only their bodies, not only their minds, but their soul, which is their relationship to the non-physical reality, the essence of who and what they are outside of the materialistic realm. So this is why the state has to control your resources, which is your body and your time. And the state also has to control your mind, which forces you and your children into public education system, and you don't have a choice. They force you into the university system to make you believe that success is only based upon having a bachelor's degree from the indoctrination program we call the university system. Super success comes from becoming a master and getting a master's degree in the Western university system. And being super master awesome is to become a doctorate, to get your healing, to be able to teach the people their highest success rate of education forever. And then you've reached the pinnacle of the human thought process passed down by the monkey evolution program. You are the pinnacle of the synthetic universe that exists out of nothing. You have now reached the pinnacle of meaning and purpose in the synthetic universe. You've come from the Big Bang. You went through the dinosaur age. You went through the monkeys program, and now you not only have a smartphone, but you've graduated. Not only from high school, but from your bachelor's degree, your master's degree, and now you have a doctorate. You are the best in the universe. This mentality is the extension of the Jesuits who were colonizing, who went into the lands and were, switching everybody's names from who and what they were, from the Native American, Aboriginal American peoples to, Jose and Chavez and Castro and all these Spanish names, and even speaking Spanish now. This is the actual alchemy that gets in and locks down your mind. The alchemy of the English language locks down your ability to think beyond a limited frame of consciousness, when you can see the depth of certain languages, like ancient languages, that where one word or one meaning has all these different phrases or something like that. And something as simple, it's basically like the English language is the hot dog, French fries, and apple pie version of language. There's no psychological or spiritual nutrition in something like that. I mean, you get something out of it because you can communicate and share on a basic level. But when you see that, this is a good comparison to like the mainstream media. It's fast food for reality. It's locking you into the materialistic realm of who and what you are, or who and what you think you are. And then you just buy into whatever the people around you are buying into. This is that slave mentality. And one thing that I'm seeing that is happening is that the expansion of coming from the crown, the authority of the crown, the taxes back then, the lynching, the installing of and all the other medieval techniques that they used to, harm people back then. The extension of that today is just the prison and the military industrial complex, where they were racking people up back in the day under the crown. Now they're just, sending out drones to drop bombs on people under the guise of fighting terrorism for peace. War equals peace, or brings peace, in that whole mentality. But the balance to that war is the psychological warfare. So you had the crown that was installing all of these mechanisms back in the day to lock down the soul, the mind, and the body. Then moving into the idea of colonizing the new world and saying, well, we discovered this land. Well, how the hell are you going to discover something when people have already been living here for hundreds of thousands of years? So that's another psychological lockdown. Beyond that was the transatlantic slave trade deception, that when you understand that the people who win the wars write the history books, they write down how the history goes. That's the actual psychological warfare. When the colonization was rolling along and expanded over centuries, the history books were written that said the so-called African Americans or Black Americans that are here today were only brought here because Christopher Columbus initiated and the slave trade, and then all of these people just brought slaves over here, and then the slaves that were brought over here from Africa, who are now so-called the African Americans, were built this country. And then now you have this pride in having escaped slavery that you don't even challenge the storyline that predates that, which is that the so-called melanated people were already here, which is the storyline that actually empowers you because it relates. It is the truth that you are already here, and not only the so-called melanated people, but everybody, because everybody becomes empowered by the truth. So the storyline of the transatlantic slave trade removes the power and installs this deception and limited frame of history and observing your reality that is only focused on the idea of Western civilization and colonization controlling everything that you think on your soul, your mind, and your body, because at some level you also have this sense of pride in having escaped slavery. You have this sense of pride of having lived through slavery, and your ancestors going through that and in a sense, people can't really let that go. It's difficult to let that history go because it's been utilized as like an empowering space now. We should just move on because we've already gotten past that. But if you take on that mentality, you're actually going to set yourself up for a further enslavement, because you're separating yourself further and further away from the truth and locking yourself further and further into the double back deception that the so-called powers that be want to lock you in by keeping you away from the real history and keeping you in this synthetic history that's been generated to set the foundation for the future program, which is the paper genocide of the idea of the new age. We're all one, we're all human. So when we locked ourselves into the idea of the melanated people were only brought here by the European slave trade, then that's a power. That's the power that they inflame every day when they have you singing the national anthem. That's the power that keeps that they tell you that these are your forefathers, and they etched their faces of your forefathers into the mountain into the earth, that's a statement that this is their land, that this is where history starts, that this is where, and that's the entire deception as a whole. And all these micro deceptions keep those systems afloat. And the mainstream media, the university system, and everything in the Western civilization is another mechanism to the foundation to keep this entire deception afloat. So you can't question any of it, because a lot of the times it's just too overwhelming to realize, to, say, well, what are we supposed to do? What are we going to do? We're supposed to just tear everything down? Well, it's a matter of tearing it down from the inside out first, and from the inside, not from the outside. See, to control people, they have to lock you into the materialistic version, which is the outside, your shell, your idea of yourself, which is why the race agenda is expanded so much on that limited frame. And that's how they mix in this truth with the deception, because if it was just deception, you wouldn't fall for it. But there is something definitely there with having to understand and empower yourself with the real truth of who and what you are on the material plane. Your body has a balance, an equal balance to the power of your mind and your soul. There's an equal relationship there, that you wouldn't be able to expand the mind if you didn't, in this reality, you wouldn't be able to expand the mind if you didn't have the body to ground the mind. And you wouldn't be able to expand the soul if you didn't have the mind to ground the soul. So you can't ground the mind, you can't ground the soul without grounding the mind, and you can't ground the mind without having a grounded body. And this is the interpretation why it's so crucial to understand who and what you are on the physical level, and then work your way up from the history through the present moment to the future. And when we separate ourselves from understanding any of those to the depths, and we lock ourselves into one or the other, whether it's the emotional body of being locked into the race agenda of the physical reality, or being locked into the so-called understanding of just, intellectual circles, just keep on going in that, and not at all thinking that, we should look into the physical history, the physical reality. It's all about the mind. It's all about the psychology. It's only about the philosophy. It's only about that. Something gets lost there. A lot of the times we separate ourselves from, when you lock yourself into either one of them, you separate yourselves from the other, the balances of the other. So people who get locked into the idea of the spirit and say that's it, well, you're missing out on the grounding agent and the balances of the higher mind, and locking yourself out of the grounding agent and the reality of the physical body. So the same thing, this is how we lock in. This is an example of the linear construct. Once you are locked into the linear construct of whatever kind of thought process it is, then you can be controlled through the illusion of authority. This is why the mainstream media consistently has to lock you into this chaotic storyline every day. Trump says something new every day. Alex Jones brings up a new story every day. TYT, a new story every day. But all of those linear stories still exist underneath the blanket of authority, where you as the people are completely disempowered. You are powerless to the umpteenth degree, because you are not allowing yourself to be aware of the nonlinear reality. So this is the intention of the mainstream media, the university system, the heliocentric model, and all of the other deception programs that are out there. And what I'm saying is, when I've been making a lot of these videos and it seems like I'm attacking the New Age or attacking the flat earth. I'm not attacking any of that stuff. I'm bringing my perspective of how these mechanisms can, are, and will be used for a further enslavement of not the human experience, not just on a physical level, but now it's coming from the psychological warfare, and it's grounding, or it's using the spiritual agent and grounding itself in the psychological warfare, whereas in the past it was using the authority, when I say it, or the so-called they, or the so-called powers that be. Whereas in the past, because the control agent has to adjust to the level of consciousness of the people. In the past, we were at a particular level of consciousness where we could be controlled by the idea of intellect and the idea of deception, by telling you that the kings and the queens of the colonial, the kingdoms of, the ancient times had power over you. They were empowered by God, and then the fluid that made that true in your reality was stuff like money, gold, the materialistic things that keep you away from being comfortably anchored in your human resources and your experience as a whole from that space. So back in the day, we were locked down, we were grounded in the physical agent and being manipulated by the psychological, the idea of intellect that was empowered by the religions that were passed down too, because the state and the church are one and the same even today. Now the consciousness is expanding naturally and in the linear frame of reality, where we have this ability to communicate more freely. We have this ability to receive a lot more information. So we are opening ourselves up, and we are expanding our consciousness and our knowingness to where we can no longer, we will no longer be, allow ourselves to be locked down with physical and psychological manipulations. Now it has to go further into the spiritual lockdowns and deception, anchoring itself in the intellectual, psychological grounding agent, which is where our status quo is. The status quo used to be in the physical reality. Now, when we were, struggling with, food and water, now food and water is all there. So we can't be, they can manipulate it, but we would quickly take it over and just be okay physically, because we wouldn't be limited to them. And they know that, the so-called they know that. Now we have to be locked in to this dumbed down state intellectually. This is where NASA comes in. This is where people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox, Ray Kurzweil, the whole Bill Nye, the whole transhumanism movement, the quantum theory movement, the CERN, all of these, the New Age agenda, secret space program, UFO technologies, all this other stuff is so far out of the everyday reality of the everyday person's reality, that only the people in the know, only the so-called powers that be are, empowered by this information, and they are the ones who will usher us into the future. So our baseline foundation is now on the psychological place, on the psychological scale. This is why the warfare of today is a psychological warfare. In order to make us believe into whatever they're telling us, they have to empower themselves from the dog-eat treat of the spiritual warfare, or the spiritual knowingness. This is where quantum physics comes in. And back in the day where the Big Bang came in, it was like, scientism is your God. Don't worry about how the Big Bang happened. Don't worry about, anything else. It's just an accident. Everything just happened. And science is your son of God. Science is a so-called science. The scientism is your son of God. And it's the one who ushers you into this whole forward progress. It gives you your food. It gives you this. You have to give thanks to all of this that is now the Western civilization. So this is why they have to tell you that there's a definite separation between church and state. It's not. It's from the psychological warfare perspective, it's all one storyline, one indoctrination program. And what I'm saying is that back in the day when the Western society was activating in the so-called New World with its Messiah, that is Christopher Columbus, ushering the New World, creating the foundation to the industrial age, stepping out of the old barbaric time frame and into the new so-called technological framework or foundations for what we are existing in today. What they had to do to initiate that, to keep the people disempowered, was to, since they couldn't physically genocide everybody, I mean, they could keep going, but eventually people would, stop the entire process. So they stopped that and switched the suit. They switched the style. And instead of regular genocide, they switched over to a paper genocide, which is controlling the psyche, controlling the mind. This is where it came in and said, we are the ones who brought over all of the so-called black people from Africa to the Americas. So what that does, it says the so-called white people that came over to the Americas are equal to the so-called black people that came over to the Americas, because we all came at the same time, which is what we know today is a blatant lie. It's a total farce. The majority of melanated people, that's not to say that some white people weren't already here somewhere, but the majority of this land was Native Americans and Aboriginal Americans, which is the original so-called black Americans. We were already here. The proof of this is you can go even down in South America. The majority of people there are dark skinned. The Olmecs predate the Mayans and the Aztecs. So all of these stories have existed and are existing. Another proof of that is Poverty Point in northern Louisiana. When you see the structures there, the mound builders there that have all kinds of sites that are thousands of years old, and then you have mound builders even up in Oakland. The Ohlone people were mound builders at the same time, and those go back far, so many thousands of years. And then you see these images of these native people who are extremely dark skinned, or copper colored at the same time. So that's the original definition of the Americans, or copper colored people. This is from the European perspective. So this is their own work, their own. So my main point is that what happens is when you say that all of the melanated people were brought over here only by the European slave trade, it makes it sets the foundation for the idea of the New World. It's like, okay, well, since so-called white people and so-called black people came to the Americas at the same time and started this new world at the same time, even though we were slaves and they were the slave owners, we need to just get over it. And since we came here together to this new world, we need to just get over it and start this new world and become, the rightful, the righteous new world that we can be under these ideas like the Constitution that other people don't even have. Not even going into understanding. This is when a lot of people reference the U.S. Constitution, they won't even know. A lot of them don't even know that the many, if not all, of the core essence of the U.S. Constitution actually came from the Iroquois, something called the Iroquois Confederacy, which predates the U.S. Constitution, this is where all of that stuff came from. So you can't get away from it. All of this that we subscribe to today as wonderful largely is synthetic and was stolen. And this is the psychological warfare that is creating this synthetic foundation that people are trying to, the so-called powers that be are trying to hopefully gear people up and kind of like stew people up into this mechanism that just falls into the next psychological warfare. So the initial psychological warfare was to tell you that we brought you over here. The only reason you are successful in the new world is because we brought you over here. Yeah, we brought you over here as slaves, and we destroyed your entire family, and we raped and pillaged everything that you were, and we destroy everything. We labeled you as 3/5 of human. We still don't respect and honor who and what you are today, but we need to just get over that, and we need to just move into this new world. Okay, stop being divisive. That is the control grid. That is the mechanism that's being used today, because they're trying to hide the truth of the matter, which actually empowers the people. Just imagine if the millions of people, the millions of melanated people that were already here, that are here right now, realize that this is your original land. This is where your peoples were birthed from. This is your earth. This is your blood. Once people connect with that space, you will have an entirely different race of people. You will, on the soul, the mind, and the body. You will have an entirely different frequency of people once that slave chain mentality is broken, because it is the truth. It's the truth that you are so much deeper than the synthetic illusions passed down to you. And that's why this shallow version of race relations and race agenda is being amplified on the mainstream media and so on and so forth, because they can control that. The so-called they can control that, and you will have people who will say, oh, well, I'm not a part of that. I'm not racist. And they won't do the research to go deeper into what the truth is. They will just pride themselves in not being a part of it. So that's the difference between just not being racist and being anti-racist. Like Dr. Angela Davis is saying in her quote, there's a difference between not being racist and being anti-racist. When you get into anti-racism, you have to ground yourself into the truth. You can't just say it. You have to know why the origins exist in the first place. So I'll end it on this, because on this point, which is all of that I just mentioned is the precursor to the next paper genocide, because after they genocided the Australian Aboriginals, took over the land of the Polynesian people, which is the Hawaiian Islands and Samoa and all the other lands around there and everywhere else, Guam, Korea, because there's only reason why there's a North and South Korea is because the United States bombed the shit out of it and created all this bullshit that was going on. All the terrorism and all that shit that's going on right now that people in the United States label as terrorism and the wars that they're fighting is because they've been generated by the people in the United States. The war on drugs, all of this, the stuff, the CIA and the FBI was putting this, the war on, gang violence and all that shit. The CIA and the FBI were putting guns in the hood, in the so-called hood. They were shipping that stuff in there in order to create this chaos amongst the people who are fighting for the scraps, who don't even have enough money for human resources that they have to fight. So they'll either use guns to fight and get that stuff, or use drugs to sell to get money to get that stuff. This is the baseline psychological warfare that is still not being acknowledged, and until it's acknowledged, it won't be healed, and we won't be actually able to move forward anywhere. So these are all the stories that are just being pawned off as, oh, well, you're being divisive if you talk about that stuff. We should just move on. This is why Alex Jones is out there, TYT is out there, Bernie Sanders was out there. Bernie Sanders only exists out there for you to believe in the slave system, to make you have any kind of hope in the system. No different than Barack Obama. He was out there to make you have hope in the slave system, as if it was for you in the first place. It never was. It never will be. It never was. It never will be. That's my main point. And the next deception of paper genocide to disempower the people. See, the so-called melanated people of the New World, we call the United States, and pretty much all of everywhere who's falls underneath the Maritime Admiralty system, which is the legal name, collateral slave, the Federal Reserve fiat currency system, where it used to be under the gold standard. Now basically the slave labor, the people themselves are the gold bars that are the collateral against the superpower, the world superpower. So we are our ignorance, our ability to fall into this slave program is what empowers the system. And since we continue to play the game, the so-called powers that be will just continue to expand it. So back in the day, the actual slaves were the money that was being traded on the stock market. That is the same thing that's happening today. They installed the fiat currency system in between then and now, but the same thing that's powering that system is the people. So back in the day, literal slaves were being traded on the market back in the day as the first currency. Now and that was under the idea of the paper genocide, when the East Coast of the United States was colonized and then moved west and started labeling people, labeling the Mexicans as, or labeling Native Americans as Mexicans, and labeling melanated Black Americans as African American, or labeling some Native Americans, or some of the melanated Americans were labeled as Native Americans. Everything was just mixed up by the people in so-called authority. That was the paper genocide, and that's how people were locked in to this idea of Western civilization, this idea of Western forward progress that was the evolutionary peak of reality brought down by the hand of God, because they were the smart ones. The manifest destiny gave them the power to enslave, destroy, poison, and take their land and build this industrial age that we live in today. This is that same mentality that the White House, the politics, the military industrial complex is still running underneath today. The manifest destiny. They think they can just control everything by destruction, by the alchemy of psychological warfare. The new paper genocide is the new world order, the new age, new world order that will say everybody is just human. Everybody is one people. We need to come together in peace and be one people. You can fall underneath this program of peace and change and the new world, possibly if you buy into this new currency, or you buy into this new way of life, or whatever it is. Ultimately, it'll be to have you following the same authority figures that installed the program in the past, the so-called powers that be. It'll be the same thing. So the same thing that happened to the native Aboriginal Americans is being set up to happen to the entire world with this new world, new age agenda. So just like the Native Americans or the melanated Aboriginal Americans were labeled as African American, Black, Negro, slave, Mexican American, all these other different labels that are categorized, that fall into a category of enslavement by the system. That same mentality, that same warfare, that same paper genocide is being expanded into the mentality of the New World. The triggering of the race agenda is the precursor to that in the Americas, in the United States of America right now. The chaotic mentality of Trump with his white supremacist statements and all this other stuff is the self-implosion of this program to activate the Bernie Sanders of the entire world. So the Barack Obamas of the entire world, the deception of the world instead of just the United States. And it'll all be under the guise of forward progress and new age, new world progression. And the new age community is setting this up with this whole Pleiadian, Anunnaki storyline, the star seeds, the alien agenda, the secret space program, all of this technology merged in with the UFO and alien agenda, all this stuff, Area 51, Sasquatch, all these people who are skirting around the storyline, where you can read this information is readily available. You can research this information for yourself. I'm not saying anything that's new. In fact, most of the people who listen to this channel know what I'm talking about. I just do my best to bring it together so people can see how it's being manipulated against the people. So when I reference the new age sort of flavor of the flat earth community, it's not to try to divide the flat earth community and all that other shit. It's to expand the perspective and share that, there's more than one storyline going on here. And if you don't know that the intention of the new age community and how it's been set up, and like I said in previous videos, this is not something like a theory of mine. If you have heard of channelers, you know what channelers are. This is a heavy duty lock into the new age community. One of the main channelers in the new age community is a channeler named Cryon. Cryon has been invited to the United Nations to speak to the United Nations at the United Nations at least 7 times.
Greetings, dear ones. I am Cryon of Magnetic Service. And there would be those, as there always are, who would say impossible. Impossible. Let those now, in these few brief moments of this message, be filled with an energy that could not possibly be from themselves, as proof that the portal has been opened and the door has swung. And what you have are simple words from the other side of the veil through a human being, the way all Scripture has always been delivered on the planet. Humans have written all of it, through the divine connection that is built into the DNA. All of it. And this is no different. For the one whose voice you hear now is no different than the voice that you have heard in the prophets of old. And the profundity of what he says through me is personal. It's not for the ages. It's for you in the chairs. It's for those in the building. This is the change. This is what we call the new energy. For it opens the door for all to do this, which often is seemed as odd and strange and weird. And I'll tell you, it's none of those things. It is a connection, a pipeline to spirit, what you call God. It is the love that you're missing in your life, that you could have by pushing on the door, and in comes the family to sit in your lap, to hold your hand, to tell you that the impossible is doable.
This is a firm step from the new age merging with the government, merging with the state. This is another proof. Another proof of that is, people like Oprah Winfrey with her Super Soul Sunday, and talking about having Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra on her show and her network, and having all these celebrities talk about their spiritual experiences and their perspectives on life and all this other nonsense that's out there. It's to make you believe in the system. Oprah is a part of that boule mentality. She's a part of that control grid. This is why you have a lot of the LGBT storylines being spread even more so in the mainstream media to separate the balances of nature, the masculine and the feminine, the original, to create more chaos in the mentality, not only in the individual, but of the entire collective. And they'll sell it to people under this idea of being nice and being unified and coming together, when ultimately the intention of this mentality is to remove the power, remove the inherent power of the masculine and the feminine balances of this reality. So this is why you have these rappers and all of these people who are celebrities that are on television that have all of these gay storylines in their secret stash, and they have all of this like the effeminization of the black men that's being televised right now. Like I think I'm getting ready to watch this Taylor Swift new music video that just came out, but that's just one example of by effeminizing the so-called black men. What's happening is that they're creating another crew, another like camaraderie, another something to rally around that has been not only triggered by the psychological warfare, but the physical warfare. All of these genetically modified substances that are being put into these foods are affecting the way people become. When you drink all of this, dairy, when you drink all of this milk and drink all of these, I think it was like the difference between almond milk. I think almond milk has like too much of some kind of like testosterone, and soy milk has a lot of, I can't think of the word, I got a brain fart right now for what the feminine molecule is. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But all of these things are affecting us on a molecular level, and so we're being this is the war for the soul, the mind, and the body. If your relationship to the spirit is affected, then all they need to do is sever your ties for the higher mind, install mind control programs through social media, through television, and play with the genetics of your body. And this is why the food is being messed with. This is why there's fluoride in the water. This is why there's chemtrails in the sky. This is why all these testing is being done with all the vaccines. This is why all this stuff is out there. Prescription drugs is running rampant. This is why cannabis is illegal. This is why psychedelics are illegal. All of this has a meaning and a purpose to dumb people down and have them fall into that same mentality of complacency, dormancy, and being subjected to this authoritarian situation. They are utilizing little crumbs of the truth to sell you the overall deception. And how I see it is that it makes perfect sense for them to utilize and co-opt the flat earth whenever they're ready to have people buy in to this new version of reality. And at the same time, they can demonize and start to hold the people who have been lying, so-called lying to that, as if they're separate from the same people in power that will remain in that illusory power grid. They can hold those people accountable. So they can throw Bill Nye under the bus, which is already happening, by the way. Joe Rogan he used to be kissing his ass, and he's already teamed up with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but Joe Rogan has already been throwing Bill Nye under the bus. Neil deGrasse Tyson is going to be thrown under the bus very soon too, because Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson are buddy. They're best friends. That's that whole Star Talk radio crew. As soon as that stuff starts to implode, when it implodes to whenever they choose to make their next move, that's when I'm saying that the so-called flat earth community will be co-opted by the mainstream, and that will be the next distraction. Whatever it is, it'll be to sell in this new, and it'll be merged in with this new age, new world mentality to get people to believe themselves into this. We don't need to separate ourselves anymore. We're all one. We're all, whether it's through underneath the alien agenda that will unify everybody, like, oh, we're being attacked by aliens from another dimension or another, wherever. We need to unify as humans and fight this. Whatever angle they come from, I don't know what it'll be, but I see the pieces on the board. But you see where I'm coming from. The paper genocide of the United States of America that happened to the melanated people, the Native Americans, the Mexican peoples of the North American peoples, that paper genocide is going to be the next deception, the next psychological warfare that will be delivered. It will go international. It was national when they installed or activated the idea of the new world. The new world, the industrial age. We're all one people here in the United States. It was a national psychological genocide, a national paper genocide, and psychological, psychological warfare. It's going to go international next. And they'll do it by making you believe into it, by your celebrities, by your musicians, by your new age channelers and new age speakers and all these other things that are out there. And the government will change too. So for the idea of better, and then they'll just say, all this other stuff about how we need to come together. That's why I say it's so dangerous to sort of fall into that mentality of, where we're all just one and all this other stuff. It's not that simple. It's when you break it all the way down, when you power through the complexities of it all and come out the other end. Yes, it's that simple. But if you just stop at the so-called finish line of flat earth and say, well, it's that simple, we're just a flat earth human people, that's it, and you haven't gone through the complexities of the history of the psychological warfare of how that system that enslaves people got to where it is today, you're just going to be setting people up for another deception, another mind control program. And that's why I say it's very dangerous to allow that to happen. It's already happening. That is the syllabus of the New Age community already. It's already happening. People in the New Age community don't give a shit about what happened on a racial scale. They don't care about the histories of colonization. They don't care about that because they claim themselves to be of a higher consciousness that is of the human consciousness, and that's all that needs to happen. That is the New Age mentality. So they don't care they don't look at the history, they don't look at any of that stuff. They just say, look, it doesn't matter anymore. We need to just move on. And one of their driving forces is this whole starseed movement and all that other stuff. And it's dangerous. It's sickening to me. I've been through that community. I know how that shit works. I've heard these conversations over and over and over again. It's still very much alive and well. And just as much as the New Age community rallies around the idea of the Pleiadians and the Andromedans and your starseed origins and all that other stuff, the mentality of flat Earth, in my perspective, the people who are coming from this whole mainstream thing of flat Earth are falling into that same sort of mechanism. They're saying, oh, well, we live on a flat Earth. We have a meaning and a purpose. Everything is just wonderful now. We need to just come together as one. Oh, you're talking about history and race relations? Well, you're divisive. Something's wrong with you. Really? Are we going to do this again? I just got out of this New Age mentality community where they were saying the same shit. So now flat Earth is doing the same thing. This is how I'm seeing it. And once flat Earth, how I'm seeing it, once flat Earth gets to a certain point of unification and understanding, or enough people, once the status quo shifts enough where enough people get into speaking about it, or at least questioning the reality of the heliocentric deception, that's when it'll snap into gear, and the mainstream will have to try to curve the mentality to go wherever it is that they want it to go. And the most obvious place that they would like it to go is into the New Age channel that's already been running for decades now. It's not new. It's only new in the mainstream with like Oprah. That the New Age mentality has been around for a long time. Channeler's been around for a long time. This whole space age mentality has been around for a long time. So they're not just the so-called the so-called powers that be is not just going to let this slide. They're not just going to let it go. They're going to use that energy. They're going to use those people. They're going to use those storylines to, in some kind of way, whether to implode it or whether to activate it and sell it as something so-called amazing to the people. Flat Earth will just be another one of those mechanisms, how I'm seeing it. Because it's been 2 years that have gone by now, and the progression of it just makes sense to me. That's how it's been going on. So that's pretty much this video. I know I went a little longer than I thought I was gonna go, but I needed to set that platform of the United States paper genocide, which is now all over the world already, but it's very obvious, the paper genocide of the United States, when you see the modern slavery and how that's been activated, and how that will just be used as an international paper genocide, because that's how we are controlled. We are controlled by paper. Contracts, your birth certificate, the fiat currency system, your social security number. The contracts of the maritime admiralty system is what locks us in to this idea of authority that gives these so-called powers that be this authority over us. And that's why I bring up a lot of the storylines that challenge the authority, that challenge the power, the so-called power of the so-called powers that be. So instead of just fighting linearly, this, oh yeah, red against blue, Democrat versus Republican, globalist versus Americana, or whatever Alex Jones calls himself, or conspiracy truthers versus, sheep, whatever the hell people want to label themselves as. Until you activate that mentality and put it into gear, then none of it's really going to matter, because you're still going to be at the whim of whatever the authoritarian system says, and whatever the whim of the status quo, the people who are going to continually be falling for the indoctrination programs. And that's why I share a lot of this information about race and history, is because that helps people heal and let go. And once you heal and let go, you start to empower yourself. You don't need to rally around something to empower yourself. In fact, that's a synthetic empowerment. If you need something outside of yourself, such as the New Age, such as the flat Earth, then it's vulnerable. It's not who and what your maximum potential really is. The true empowerment comes from the inside. You don't need to rally around something. You can do it from the inside out. And that's why I say reconnecting with yourself, with your roots, and then moving forward, then moving into the higher mind, then moving into the spiritual interpretations of this reality in order, in vibration, in frequency. This is pretty much what all of my videos are, hitting on different angles. So for people who are still calling me divisive, or I'm trying to do this and that, label me whatever it is you need to label me to feel comfortable for yourself. That's fine. But I'm going to keep doing what it is that I'm doing. And whether, my intentions are real. I know who I am. I know where I come from. I know what I'm doing. My intentions are real. They're true. And they come from a compassionate foundation that's not centered on me or any one thing, but all of the brothers and sisters across the earth that have been subjected to this authoritarian sort of mentality that's been inflicting our ancestors, our mothers, our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, everybody. And until we uproot every one of the psychological, physical, and spiritual warfare programs that are out there, then we're just going to be subjected to whatever the next program gets delivered to us. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for joining me. And thank you again for all the support, for the people who support this channel. And like and share the videos. I really do appreciate that. And I'll keep doing as many putting out as much information as I can whenever I feel guided to do it. And so thank you again. Until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.